Hey guys, how's it going? First thing I'm going to do is talk about our homework assignment for today. So I've asked you to write an 8-line poem with A B A B C D C D rhyme scheme, and it has to be at least 6 syllables per line. That is not terribly complicated. It's something I'm pretty sure we've done before. I know we've written at least one 8-line poem in class. We've written several 4-line poems. Most of you know how to utilize rhyme scheme in a poem. And I've posted the end-line words for each of the following lines that I made in about 60 seconds, so don't expect much from this. But dog, cat, frog, bat, rough, light, tough, night. That's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, the end line sounds all the way down through here. I posted those on the assignment. You can copy those. Do not copy the entire poem, but if you absolutely cannot come up with words that rhyme and you just need to pull something, copy those and put something else in front of them. I don't mind that. If you just really, really struggle with rhyme and figuring out rhyme scheme, that's okay. Now, when I say at least 6 syllables per line, I don't mean exactly six. This poem that I've written does not have exactly six. Most of the lines have more. If you want to go with exactly six, that's fine. It's not a lot of words. I mean, 6 syllables per line for 8 lines, you're looking at, probably between 20 and 50 words. That's not a lot of writing. And again, I've already given you template as far as the rhyme. So I don't expect this to be too difficult. I don't expect it to be anything to take you more than, 15, 20 minutes at the maximum. Like I said, I did this in about maybe a minute or two. So I'll read it to you just as an example and we'll talk about it very briefly. Then I'm going to go into a little bit more about your poetry project that we're going to have to do next week. And you probably want to start on that this weekend, at least picking out your poet. And I'll give you kind of some examples of what I'm looking for because I don't want you to panic and think I'm looking for something too in depth or that I'm looking for a really, really complicated poetry analysis. I'll tell you the kinds of things that I expect you to say. All right, so for this, it says, there once was a furry dog. He chased a completely bald cat. Out jumped a massive frog and bludgeoned them both with a bat. The dog thought this a bit rough, and the cat wondered who cut the light, but the frog remained ever tough and bid them both a solid good night. All right, so that's goofy and slightly dark. And it's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. It's 8 lines, 2 separate stanzas, which is what I'm looking for, 2 quatrains. And each line has at least 6 syllables. Like I said, there's nothing complicated about it. It's narrative and it's goofy, but yours doesn't have to be either of those things. Yours could be really serious and it doesn't have to tell a story. I'm not putting any requirement on the actual creative aspects of your poem. It can be about whatever you want it to be about. Like I said, you do not have to use dog, cat, frog, bat, rough, light, tough, night. I'd honestly prefer if you didn't. Oh, there's a fly in my house. I'd prefer if you came up with your own rhymes, but if you can't, or if you just don't feel like it, you can use mine. That's fine. Just don't use the whole poem or any of the lines from it. But the overall structure should be the same. You should have a quatrain, a space, then a quatrain. They should rhyme like that. All right. I think that's pretty simple. But if any of you have any issues with it, if it drives you crazy and you just can't figure it out, let me know, and I'll try to give you some feedback and give you some help. All right, so I'm going to give you some examples of kind of what I'm looking at with the poetry project. So this is Fire and Ice by Robert Frost, which we already talked about. We did for a homework assignment, and I reviewed it in another video. So we've already talked about this one, but this is assuming maybe you really liked this poem and you decided to pick Robert Frost for your poetry project, which you can. I don't mind that. And you went through and you said, all right, I got to find 3 poems by him. They've all got to be a page or less, and they've got to be something that I can, analyze and get some information from. So what am I looking for as far as when I say some information? So in general, I want you to pick the 3 poems. I want you to tell me a little bit about each of them. So with this one, you would say, well, it has a rhyme scheme. You would say it goes A, B, A, B, C, B, and then C, B again. So it's got a pretty strict rhyme scheme. It's just one line off of being A, B, A, B, C, B, C, B. And it does have a sense of meter, as we talked about. It goes 8, 4, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 4, 8. Well, not 8, I'm sorry, 4, 4. And so it does stick to some sort of meter. And you could tell me that, and that's all I'm looking for. You could say it's one long stanza. That's, just a couple sentences. And then one or 2 sentences about what you think it means. So you might say, it seems to be talking about the end of the world. He's arguing whether it's going to end in fire or in ice. I don't have to agree with your interpretation. That's not my actual interpretation of fire and ice. I'm not going to go into mine because it's a little more complicated. But whatever your interpretation is, as long as it comes from the poem, as long as you're talking about the poem, I'm not going to mark off for what you interpret it to be. And it doesn't have to be something crazy in depth. Now, if you want to take one of these poems or take your poet and look them up and get a little bit of extra information, I don't mind that. But what I don't want you to do is to copy and paste things off the internet and just say things you found on the internet, because I'm not looking for some literary critic at Oxford's analysis of Robert Frost's poetry. I'm looking for your analysis. I want it to be in your words. I want it to be at the 6th grade level. I want it to be something that you could have come up with on your own. Like I said, if you want to get a little bit more information for your own benefit, or you think your project needs a little bit more, sure, go look some stuff up, but put it into your words, figure out a way to say it that makes sense to you, and don't steal anybody else's interpretation. If you can't interpret a poem, you can't figure out what you think it might mean, pick a different poem or pick a different poet. There are lots of poets and lots of poems. I've told you guys you can use Dr. Seuss, you can use A.A. Milne, the guy who created Winnie the Pooh. You can use Shel Silverstein, who wrote poems specifically for kids. Any kind of children's poet or anything like that, that's totally fine with me. It doesn't have to be some, college level poet that you use. If you want to, like if you want to use Shakespeare or T.S. Eliot or something, feel free, but I'm absolutely not requiring that. And again, if any of you need any feedback on any of this, if you're stuck on like one part of a poem, like you say, I can't figure out this poem's meter, send it to me. I'll look at it and I'll tell you what I think. And like I said, so that's maybe a paragraph-ish about this one poem. And then the next one I've got up here is The Road Not Taken, probably Frost's most famous poem. I'll read through it just because we haven't talked about this one. So 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Okay, so that's an extremely famous poem, like I said, probably his most famous, and it is made up of 4 stanzas of 5 lines each. You don't have to know the word for a 5-line stanza. If you just told me, it's 4 stanzas, 5 lines each, that's totally fine. And look at the rhyme scheme. We've got A, B, A, B. So A, B, A, B. Would, both, stood, could, growth. Undergrowth, obviously, but we're just worried about that last syllable. And then we've got C, D, C, C, D. So fair, claim, where, there, same. Pretty simple rhyme scheme again. Most of Frost poetry does use pretty simple rhyme scheme. Lay, black, day, way, back. Same thing. We've got E, F, E, E, F. And you could basically say that he has an A, B, A, B rhyme scheme all the way down in each of the stanzas. You just change up the letters because you're hitting a different stanza. But if you told me A, B all the way down, I wouldn't count that wrong. And then as far as meter, again, you can count the syllables. So 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood. So that's 9. And sorry I could not travel both, 9. And be one traveler, not long I stood, 9. And looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So each of those lines has 9. I'm not sure if it does all the way down. I'm not going to go through and count all of them, but it seems more likely than not that he's probably going to stay between 8 and 10 on every line. He may stay exactly 9 on each line. I'm not sure. So there's definitely a meter here. This is a very, very formally basic poem. And then as far as meaning, if you said anything about, 2 roads splitting off and a guy picking one and telling about it down in the future, that's fine. As long as it's something to do with the actual poem, as long as you're not saying, here Frost is writing about aliens invading the planet, then I'm good, okay? Not looking for anything extremely complicated. Truth about this poem is that 99% of people misinterpret it. You may have a teacher one day who misinterprets it for you. If you ever have me when we talk about this poem, I'll try to tell you what it actually means. But, what I think it actually means. It's unfair to say what it actually means. But anyway, so next one I've picked, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. This is probably my favorite by Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. All right. So again, we're dealing with a poem with a relatively simple rhyme scheme, and I think meter as well. And its structure is pretty simple. We've got 4 quatrains, 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. Okay, and again, you don't necessarily have to say quatrains. If you just said it's got 4 stanzas, 4 lines each, that's good with me. 16 lines, so it's 2 over being a sonnet. And if we look at the rhyme scheme, we've got know, though, here, snow, so A, B, A. Then queer, near, lake, year. This goes back to that line here. Okay, so we've got B, B, C, B, and he's going to echo that again. He's going to go back to this third line of this stanza. He's going to go C, C, D, C. So he's echoing sounds from previous stanzas. You wouldn't have to notice that. You just have to be able to tell me the rhyme scheme if you wanted. You could say it's basically A, B, A all the way down, with the first, second, and fourth lines of each stanza rhyme, and the third one doesn't. And then deep, keep, sleep, sleep. So here we end up with D, 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 D. Just all of these rhyme. He echoes the last line. So, and then obviously meter I think is pretty similar. I'm not going to go through and count them on this because I think you guys know how to do that at this point. But one thing after, like I said, you'll probably end up with about a paragraph, about 4, maybe 5 sentences for each of the poems. So that's 3 paragraphs. And then, and again, this doesn't have to be structured like an essay. I'm not asking for an intro and a conclusion and all that. There's no argument necessarily. This is just, a paragraph or so analyzing each poem. And then you're going to have one that talks about just in general, what do your 3 you think have in common? What's going on with them? What are some things you notice with this poet? So with Frost, we might say he uses rhyme scheme. Most of the time his rhyme scheme's pretty simple and easy to figure out. He uses meter. Most of his lines in each of the poems that I looked at are the same length or close to the same length. He might change it up a little bit, but he definitely uses it. So his poems are kind of structurally formal. Of course, you wouldn't have to say structurally formal. I understand that's not 6th grade vocabulary. And then you might say, as far as content, you might say he talks a lot about nature. He's talking about fire and ice and the world, and then he's talking about roads in a yellow wood. Then he talks about stopping in a grove of trees on a snowy afternoon or evening and watching snowfall. So he's talking about kind of rural areas, talking about nature, talking about the destiny of nature. Talks a lot about cold, like ice and snow. Just some observations like that. They wouldn't have to be those exact observations. Like I said, anything that you notice that you find similar between the 3, or anything maybe that's really different between the 3, you might say, you might say to me, the road not taken and stopping by woods on a snowy evening both talk about traveling in wooded areas, but then fire and ice is completely different to me. It's kind of talking about the end of the world, and I feel like it's just very different. That'd be fine too. You don't have to necessarily focus on similarities if you think you've picked one that's super different. Anything like that's fine. All I want to see is that you're applying the things we've learned about poetry to a set of poems. And again, you don't have to pick a Robert Frost. There are poets a lot easier than Frost. There are poets a lot harder than Frost. But there are probably roughly an infinite number of poets. I mean, there are so many poets. Some of you will probably pick some that I've never heard of. But try to pick one that you are interested in, pick one whose work you like, and pick one that you think you can get a lot out of, but also one that's not going to drive you insane. Like if you look at these Robert Frost poems and you're like, I don't have a clue what he's talking about, I don't know half of these words, this is crazy, don't do Robert Frost. If you pull up a poet and you say, I don't get this, change poets. All I'm asking is you get your parents' approval on it, and the only reason for that is that some poetry is written definitely for adults, and I don't want you looking at a poem not knowing what it means and it meaning something that you really don't need to be reading about at your age. So like I said, clear it through a parent first. Maybe have them help you pick out a couple poems, or you can send them to me. If you say, hey, I've got this poet but I'm not sure what poems to pick, send me the poet's name. I can send you a list of poems to look at. I might send you 5 to 10 titles of poems. You go through and find 3 that you like. And like I said, right now I'm thinking due date for that next Friday. I might push that back, possibly, but we'll see. As of right now, I'm going to stick with next Friday, so expect it to be due then. I will have you submitted on Turnitin. Again, this is 4 paragraphs, one for each poem and then 1 for overall. So like I said, I'm expecting page or a little over maybe. I'm not expecting, 3-4 pages or anything like that. And the only reason I'm having you submit it through Turnitin and put it in MLA and all that, MLA is for practice. I'm not necessarily grading it on the MLA, but submitting it through Turnitin is so that I know you didn't just copy and paste off the internet, okay? Because some of you are going to want to do that, and I really don't want you to do that. If you do, you will get a bad grade on this. If you don't, If you pick 3 poems, you talk about them, and you try on this, you'll get a good grade. It'll be a good test grade. It'll be an easy project that'll really bump up a lot of your grades. So do the best you can with it. Make sure you get that poem written for today, that little creative poem, the 8-line thing. If you have any problems with that, let me know. If you've got any questions about picking a poet or poems or anything of that sort, let me know that too. Any questions, I'm always available. All right, see you guys.